Hi, I'm Thomas Bowles, Prince William County Agricultural Extension Agent. Welcome to our video.
All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this week's class. It's 11 o'clock, and so we're going to get started. This week's class is on Solanaceous Diseases, and our presenter is Dr. Stephen Rideout, who is a professor at Virginia Tech, but also our extension plant pathology specialist. And he is going to talk to us about tomatoes, peppers, etc., and the diseases that they get. So, Dr. Rideout, whenever you're ready, go ahead and.
Again, thanks for joining today. Thanks for inviting me, Thomas. Looking forward to presenting. Most of this talk is from a presentation that I gave at the Virginia Association for Biological Farming this year. And so a lot of it, if you were there, I apologize for a little bit of a repeat. But so we took out the cucurbits and, just wanted to focus on identifying solanaceous diseases that are, common here in Virginia. So always start out with a disease triangle, knowing that three things have to come together for a disease to occur. You have to have a virulent pathogen, favorable weather conditions, and a susceptible host. And it's important to understand those three things because they offer a lot of clues from a diagnostic standpoint of what can be occurring. We'll talk about late blight in a little bit, but if it's really hot and dry, late blight's really not going to occur. So you have to have those weather conditions. So that would key you in that some of the damage or whatever you're looking at is probably not that disease because of the weather. So again, I think it's important to keep that in mind when you're diagnosing diseases. And there can be a lot of different things that cause damage. A lot of times in plant pathology, we focus on diseases that are caused by biotic pathogens, specifically viruses, bacteria, fungi, and nematodes. But there's just an absolute slew of other problems that you can run into that can either mimic diseases or be confusing. And sometimes it just requires, diagnosis by either a plant pathologist or even the plant pathology clinic. But keep in mind, all these things can be a problem and cause issues. In terms of the four pathogen groups, I've been with Virginia Tech for 17 and a half years now. And I kind of took, every year we keep a log of all the different vegetable diseases, and what they're caused by. So just looking at the disorders or diseases caused by these four groups, in general, fungi cause about half or even more here in Virginia of vegetable diseases. And this is, vegetable diseases, not just, diseases on other things or solanaceous. It's fairly broad. And then bacteria, viruses, and nematodes cause about a third of the remaining part of the pie there. So keep in mind, fungi are probably our most problematic group, but that doesn't mean you can't have some major issues with these other three. So diagnosing plant diseases, really, you start looking for two different things, and those are symptoms and signs. And we'll get into those a little bit more. Symptoms are plant expression of disease infection. So it's what the plant is doing in response to or looking like in response to that pathogen being there. Signs are actually the pathogen itself. And sometimes you may need some magnification to be able to see those signs. Of course, anytime you're trying to diagnose a plant disease, knowing the background is really important. And, so you want to consider all possible causes, specific tests to run, of course, your sample submission form if you're submitting it to the clinic. Symptom types, they're really endless. We'll go through some of the more common ones. And not all pathogens produce signs that you readily can see a lot of times. So, but we'll go through a few of those also. Yellowing, plant yellowing is called chlorosis. It's one of our most common symptoms. And this can be a number of different things, but sometimes the pattern of that chlorosis matters. Like, is the entire plant yellowing? Is it just the upper leaves? And then you can get into, are the veins yellow, or the veins green and the tissue yellow? So, chlorosis is, like I said, happens a lot, but you really can learn a lot from it. Necrosis is when, plant's dead. Plant tissue is dead. It's turned brown, black, etc. But, knowing something about that is important as well. For example, seeing these concentric rings, which we'll actually talk about with early blight in a little bit, can be of great importance. Sometimes the plant just doesn't grow very well. And this is a situation where these plants have been, I think this is actually nematode damage. So you can see, they're just underdeveloped, they're stunted, they're not growing well. This can be root rots, a number of different things to cause this, but that's another symptom. And occasionally we'll have overdevelopment with something like clubroot or root knot nematode damage that you can see here on these snap beans. Wilting, there's a lot of different forms of wilting as well. This is actually, we'll talk about bacterial wilt in a little bit, where the plants go from green to basically dead in a day or two. Some wilts will actually cause yellowing or chlorosis when they wilt, so knowing those patterns are important also. With viruses and herbicide injury, and sometimes some bacterial diseases, you'll actually get leaf distortion, where leaf shapes are not quite right. You have crinkling. Again, this is really common with viruses. Here's some more pictures of some viruses that you might run into. This is a potato virus Y on potato, and this is tomato spot wilt, which we'll talk about in a second. And leaf spots. Leaf spots, another very, very common thing to run into, but they all kind of matter. These spots are circular. They have pits in the middle of them. The color, these come in from the margins mostly. So, where the leaf spots are, what the shape are, that can be important as well. And then you run into just some miscellaneous symptomology, a lot of times tied to viruses that cause all kinds of wild, different ring spots and different sort of patterns on fruit. Now we'll switch into signs real quick. It could be looking at a fungus like here. You can see this wood decaying fungus here on this tree. If you go buy strawberries and they haven't been properly cared for, you can see botrytis fruiting pretty much at any grocery store. This is actually a hydroponic lettuce operation where you can actually see powdery mildew growing on the lettuce. These are both signs because you actually see the pathogen. This is southern blight, which we'll talk about in a second, on tomato. Again, you can see the mycelium of the fungus. This is corn smut, of course, very, very visible as well. And again, as I mentioned, sometimes you'll have to focus on seeing whether or not you can see the pathogen, any sort of specific spores under, microscopes. So, and always consider the distribution of the disease. Is it like in a low-lying area with this turf where water may sit? With this wheat field here, the difference was cultivar. So they switched from a disease-resistant cultivar to a disease-tolerant one or a disease-susceptible one. So these things really matter. And then, you have all kinds of resources, and basically I wanted to give you a couple of resources today before getting into specifics. As always, be careful with Google. And, there's some really good apps there for like plant identification, weed identification, even insect identification. I've looked at a bunch of different ones. And I haven't really seen a reliable disease identification app. It's something that, people are working on and we're trying to achieve, but it's fairly difficult. Social media groups can be great. They give us a lot of great ideas. But, there's tremendous disinformation that can be passed along with those as well. Usually I or somebody from my group will occasionally check into I think it's the Virginia Vegetable Gardener group on Facebook, just to see what's going on. It gives us a good idea if certain diseases are already present in Virginia. So I like to monitor that just to see if, oh gosh, here's downy mildew or something like that. But you have to be careful with the information you get there. Of course, the more you do it, the better you get. And when in doubt, you have your handy dandy extension agents and specialists willing to help in the plant disease clinic with VCE. If you are really, really, curious about one plant, let's say you just love tomatoes and you want to produce, tomatoes, and let's face it, tomatoes get a lot of diseases, and you're curious, a really good resource by crop are the APS Compendium of Diseases. And APS stands for the American Phytopathological Society, which is the professional society for plant pathologists. And these are really good sources if, again, you're dealing with mostly one specific crop. They're about $100 each. They come with digital images as well now. And there's probably, it says 60, but I think there are probably around 70, 75 different ones available on just a variety of different field crops, ornamentals, vegetables, etc. Oops, sorry, I did not mean to do that. Okay, so the next part of the talk here, I wanted to focus primarily on, the diseases of solanaceous crops. And we're going to focus mainly on tomato, just because it probably is the widest variety of diseases that we see. And it's also, the solanaceous crop that gets cultivated the most and cared about the most in Virginia. From an economic standpoint, it's also probably the most profitable one. So I want to start off with bacterial diseases. And there are two different, I say different, they present themselves very similarly, but there are different pathogens that cause bacterial spot and bacterial speck. And a lot of times with bacterial spot or speck, it's really hard to distinguish between the two in the field. So this is one that whether it's spot or speck is kind of hard to do unless you actually get testing. In the end, it's really academic, because the control measures that you would implement to control or suppress bacterial spot and speck are pretty similar. The symptomology is fairly similar as well. You'll start with lesions on the leaf, and a lot of times with bacterial spot or speck, you'll actually see a yellow halo that's going to surround that initial lesion. And that's a sign of bacterial infection versus something like, Alternaria or Septoria, which we'll get into later. But this is where it really gets ugly, is when you start having fruit infections. And these are particularly damaging. They, of course, aren't as pretty, they aren't as marketable. You certainly can eat them, They will have a reduced shelf life probably because of that, because it opens up possibility for secondary pathogens to help rot those fruit as well. So again, spots caused by Xanthomonas species. Speck is caused by Pseudomonas species. And again, the control of these two are pretty similar. Prevention really starts in the greenhouse and making sure that you get certified seed. A lot of times bacterial spot and speck infections actually begin right in the transplant production phase. And then you take that out to the field where it just proliferates. So making sure that you do a good job of cleaning your greenhouse, getting certified transplants or seed is important. Seed can be, we have a hot water seed treatment protocol for tomatoes. About 10, 15 years ago, we did a couple of hot water seed treatment workshops. If you're interested in that, let me know. That's something I can provide the information on how to do that. But basically, it's treating the seed at about 120 degrees in water for about 20 minutes. You dry the seed out. The seed remain viable. However, you have removed a lot of bacterial pathogens that may be present on that seed. So it's a good way to ensure that your seed is indeed clean. You want to consider, sterilizing wherever you're growing them, your water source. And if you start seeing spots that have that yellow halo, just get those plants out of there because you don't want that to get throughout your entire set. So again, we're talking about tomato. Bacterial spot, at least, can occur in peppers as well. And there, it's a lot of times you see the designation BLS for bacterial leaf spot. Pepper has a lot better resistance than tomatoes do. So there are some pepper varieties that are out there, traditionally bred, of course, that are resistant to bacterial leaf spot, that are good options and basically take this disease out of the equation for pepper production. Okay, so we're going to leave bacterial speck and spot and go to bacterial wilt. Bacterial wilt is caused by a soil-borne bacteria named Ralstonia solanacearum. It is not something that we encounter a lot of times in gardens, but it can be present, particularly in areas like Tidewater, Virginia, Southside Virginia. If you're in land that has a history of solanaceous crop production, you can run into it. Peppers are also a host for this pathogen. And as I mentioned, when we were talking about symptomology, you end up where you have just green plants, you get a heavy fruit load, or fruit load starts coming on, and the plant just wilts like almost overnight. You don't see yellowing. A lot of times you'll see plants that are together go down together just because it's pretty sporadic as far as how it's populated within the soil. One neat field trick that you can do with bacterial wilt is actually you can cut the stem in half, place that in a clear jar with some water, and within a few minutes, you'll see this milky substance stream out of the vascular system of the plant. And basically, that's the bacteria. And the reason for the wilting is basically that bacteria has clogged the vascular system to the point of not allowing proper water transmission. So that's why we see the wilting with it. Okay. So next, we're actually going to go to a virus. And there are a number of different tomato viruses. But the one we see most commonly in Virginia and is most damaging in Virginia is tomato spotted wilt virus. This is a virus that's vectored by thrips, most commonly or most efficiently vectored by the Western flower thrip. So the western flower thrips are more prevalent in Southside Virginia, tidewater up into the northern neck, more so than in the mountains and the eastern shore where it's more of a tobacco thrips. But western flower thrips are very efficient transmitters of this disease. And I'm a little bit worried about how much of this we'll see in 2023, just because we had a relatively mild winter, which allows for more thrips populations to overwinter, which could lead to more viruses. So it's something definitely to watch out for 2023. This is also can be a problem on pepper and eggplant as well. We generally don't see it a ton on eggplant here in Virginia, but we certainly do in pepper. And there are really two ways to manage this. One is to make sure you do everything you can to reduce thrips populations. And the second thing, and probably the most effective thing in my opinion, is to utilize resistant varieties. So if you're in Tidewater, Virginia, you might want to look into tomato spotted wilt virus resistant peppers and tomatoes, so that you won't have a lot of problem. I always say there are many faces to tomato spotted wilt. One of the things you see stunted plants. This is a virus that will actually kill plants. It can be that severe. A lot of viruses don't, but this one does. You can have a perfectly fine plant, and then all of a sudden your fruit don't look good. And the virus can manifest or appear itself in that manner as well. Okay, so next we're going to go to southern blight, which this is an interesting disease in that 15 years ago, I would say that this is a problem that is really concentrated on Tidewater, Virginia, Southside Virginia, and the Eastern Shore. But in the last 15 years, we've seen a lot more southern blight in the mountain areas in Northern Virginia. So it's more Commonwealth-wide now than it used to be. We are the transition state for southern blight. If you go much further north from us, you really don't see it. As the name would imply, it likes warm and humid conditions. So the pathogen really does well when temperatures are in the 80s and 90s and there's ample moisture present. It is soil-borne. It produces these evil little things called sclerotia that can stay in the soil for up to 5-6 years, and persist. So overwintering wise, it has great abilities in that manner. It really, when conditions are favorable, the fungus will just go crazy. This was a picture from an 85-degree day, a lot of moisture present in the air up under this plastic. This is in Southside Virginia, and the fungus really just takes off. It can cause plant death for tomato, pepper, eggplant as well, potatoes. It can also cause rot on potatoes. Really extensive host range on this, which makes it even more difficult to deal with. If you have this pathogen or you think you have this pathogen, one, you need to get it ID'd properly, make sure that's what you're dealing with. But it will become your public enemy number one, because once it gets into your operation, trying to remove it is really difficult. You just have to learn how to manage it. This is actually a pumpkin fruit. If it's not corn or grass, it's basically a host for southern blight, unfortunately. The brassicas really don't get it a lot either. But it's got a very extensive host range. So that's one definitely to keep an eye on. Next, we'll go to some foliar fungal diseases. The first that I'll talk about is early blight. And early blight is caused by Alternaria species. And you can kind of see, we were talking earlier about lesions with concentric rings. That's a symptom of early blight, is if you see a little bullseye concentric ring having lesion, a lot of times that's, indicator that you've got early blight. When it's really, really severe, you actually will have cankers present on the stem. And those cankers too will also have those concentric rings in them as well. But this is really when it becomes damaging, when you get the lesions present on the stems. This is a disease that is present also on potato. One of the reasons this picture does a great job of showing early blight damage, some of the rings, but there's also some bacterial spot in here as well. If you see these smaller lesions with the yellow halos, so it's a combination, of both. Another fungal pathogen that we see a lot of in Virginia is Septoria leaf spot, and a couple of differences here from some of the leaf spots we've talked about. With bacteria, we talked about the yellow halo. There's really no yellow halo here. With Septoria, it's a darker leaf spot, and you end up with these purplish looking margins of these lesions. No rings inside these, but what you end up with is a tan spot a lot of times. And this is a good indicator that you're having problems with Septoria. But again, we can see both early blight and Septoria present in Virginia. And here's just the side-by-side, comparison of them. Again, early blight, you're going to see the lesion with the rings, and Septoria, a darker lesion. Okay. So next we'll move to late blight. And late blight is a pathogen that fortunately we don't have every single year in Virginia. In most years we get late blight, but it's only a certain number of years where it's really, really damaging. Unlike some of the pathogens we've talked about, actually late blight is more prevalent in the mountainous regions. One, because late blight really doesn't like warm temperatures. Once the temperature gets above 85, 90 degrees, it's really not favorable for late blight. So it likes cooler temperatures, and it also likes a lot of moisture. So a lot of times, the fog, the dews that you have in the mountains that you might not get in the eastern part of the states during the growing season really, really favor late blight, and you can have some damage. Late blight is a potato and tomato disease. Of course, late blight causes the Irish potato famine, so it really doesn't need a lot of warning or introduction. Very prolific pathogen, and when conditions, if you think back to the disease triangle, when conditions are favorable, it is really, really a hard disease to deal with. For example, these tomatoes here, this is from the 2009 outbreak. And that was a particularly bad one for the East Coast. But in 2009, this tomato field had received at least 6 applications of conventional pesticides targeting late blight, and the conditions were so favorable, and the disease had progressed prior to the applications, that you couldn't catch up. So it can be really, really a damaging disease when conditions are favorable. The lesions on this one are very non-discrete. A lot of times you don't see circular lesions early on. You see these real sporadic, lesions without really good margins. One of the things that is more characteristic of late blight is if you're out in the field and you turn a leaf over and you have a lot of dew in the mornings, you'll end up with this white kind of cast to the back of the leaf. And again, you won't see this in the middle of the day when the humidity is lower, but you can see it on dewy mornings, and that's actually the fungus actually sporulating, or oomycete, I guess I should say. This is a pathogen. Again, it can't overwinter here. So it's your typical snowbird pathogen. It goes to the south, overwinters in areas like Florida, the Caribbean, and then has to travel up the coast every year. Now there are different ways for that to happen. It can come from transplants, it can come from natural weather patterns. Potato seed pieces can carry late blight. So you can actually seed potatoes with late blight, and that can create a problem. If you buy certified potatoes, they do a really, really good job of checking for late blight. But there's a website, usablight.org. It has a ton of information about the disease. And it also talks about the tracking system that we utilize. And this is just a map from a few years ago that showed where late blight was present. So you can always go there, look and see where a late blight is currently present in the United States. So I covered, most of the tomato diseases, then the main tomato diseases in Virginia. But there are about 15 other ones that I didn't cover. So there are other diseases out there, like we didn't talk about root knot nematodes. Root knot nematodes can be a big problem, or nematodes in general. We didn't talk about fusarium or Bacterial Wilt. So again, this isn't an all-inclusive talk on every tomato disease that we can have. There is one disease that, getting away from tomatoes, that I did want to mention, and that's pepper anthracnose. Primarily because I kind of view that as the worst pepper disease in Virginia. Excuse me, I had to get some water. Anyway, this is a fungal disease. Chances are, if you've grown pepper, you probably have seen this. You get these really wild looking lesions. Again, they have some rings to them. When it's humid outside, you'll actually see the fungus and you'll see it fruiting. So you actually see the sign. But pepper anthracnose is really, really difficult to deal with. It's hard to control organically or conventionally. So it is something just to know what it looks like and be cognizant. If you catch it early, and you have a smaller planting of peppers, and you start to see some develop on fruit, get it out of there. So you can rogue it, remove it from the field, try to reduce the inoculum that could spread to your other fruit as well. So that's pretty much specific diseases what I had today. Did want to end with a couple of resources. We have two commercial vegetable production guides in Virginia. We have the Mid-Atlantic guide, and we have the Southeastern vegetable guide. We are involved with both. We're the only state that's involved with both. The information that's contained within these guides is very similar. However, it is presented in a different manner. So be very cognizant if you're using one and jump to the other. If you're more of a gardener or interested in, home grounds, then this is the appropriate book for you. This is Home Grounds, an Animal Pest Management Guide. That also has a tremendous amount of information about which fungicides are available to the public, or bactericides, if you will. And also some good tips on how to manage diseases from a cultural practice standpoint as well. So with that, again, I'd like to thank you for your time today and for having me today. And I'll stop sharing and try to entertain any questions that you may have.
So does anyone have questions? Feel free to ask. While people are thinking, just wanted to make two quick comments. Just a reminder that pesticide laws change state to state. So if you happen to use an out-of-state resource to identify a disease, keep in mind that what they recommend may not be appropriate for Virginia. So you can check with the extension office, or if you're out of state, check with your local extension office and see what's appropriate in your state. So anybody else or anyone have thoughts or questions?
There's a question in the chat box. Are you talking about what to do when you start seeing these signs, or what causes it?
So basically what I presented today was more of a diagnosis guide. So, in terms of this is this specific disease. So for each one of these diseases, there's kind of a tailored, and it's in the production guides, as well. So if you see, early blight, you can go to the production guide or look online and find out what you can do to control it, or look at it prior to, and that way, maybe start fungicide applications or something like that. So mostly this presentation is about identification and diseases that we commonly see. But, you can talk with your extension agent or specialist to get more specific control recommendations.
Do these same diseases affect tomatillos as well?
In general, yes. They're fairly similar, and you'll have a lot of the similar diseases. The genetic package within tomatillos is, it's a little different. So there are certain diseases that it's worse. They're worse on tomatillos, and then there are certain diseases that aren't quite as bad. So it's kind of, but in general, yes, the same diseases are there.
Thank you.
Let's see, we have a question about burning bad parts. So, for example, if you have something that has a virus, I don't know that you necessarily need to burn it per se, but I would get it out of there and remove it, from your production system. And compost piles are great if they're located, far enough away from where you have your planting at. But burning is certainly something that, if you have no other way really to dispose of a lot of plant tissue, you can actually do that, and that would be fine as well.
And while we generally don't encourage folks to put plant material into landfills, in a lot of jurisdictions, they will allow you to put disease, invasive, or poisonous stuff like poison ivy or poison oak into trash instead of putting it into municipal collection of plant material. Anybody else have questions? Well, hearing none, I will say thank you again, Dr. Rideout. We appreciate this. Just so everybody knows, this will be uploaded to YouTube probably, hopefully by the end of the week. Thank you all for coming, and we will see you next time. Dr. Rideout, again, thank you very much.
No, thank you for having me. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.